Okay, so 5 minutes are up. The waiting time is over. I will get us started, and I'm sure
I
those
just
who
got
are
a notification that Sameera has left the meeting. I think she might be facing some uh, problems with her connection to the internet. Shall I just call her up
okay.
very quickly?
Okay, yeah,
Because I
sure.
don't think she's there on the call. Just
Sure.
give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay, Sameera is just joining. I have just sent her the link again and she'll just. Oh, there she is.
You
Sameera,
even
you're
have to
muted.
unmute. You're on mute.
Okay, okay, all right. But somewhere in second half, I will just put
No,
it.
we still can't hear you.
I do see that there's an availability.
Samira, just say something.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we can.
Sorry, I just fell off. So
Okay, all
hopefully
right.
All right.
again.
All right.
Okay,
Just 1 second.
lovely.
Okay, so getting us started, I am Ishita Shah, and I represent a collective called Curating for Culture. Is my voice not clear?
Notification that you got. So 4 to 5 is what you are doing, right?
Okay, 1 second.
Oh, I think can we just ask all of the participants to like mute themselves while we're presenting? Also, I think it must be one of the participants who has accidentally left their mic on.
Okay. So I was just saying that I'm Ishita Shah, and I represent Curating for Culture and your host for the evening. About the collective, we are very passionate about culture preservation, and we basically are allies or enablers of different kinds of culture preservation projects. One of them being Queer India Archives. So this dialogue series was our way to basically speak more about this project, enhance or strengthen the collaborations, receive community response, and so on. Hygiene check. We are recording the call for both dissemination and reference purposes. Somebody asked if the recording will be available. Yes, it will be uploaded on YouTube quite soon for you to catch up. And yeah, what else am I missing? So yeah, if you can keep your mics on mute and keep the camera on if you're comfortable. It would be nice to see you all. And if you need any help, please use the chat. We are all here. I regret that Shobna S. Kumar, who is the founder of Queer India Archives, is unable to join us due to some unfortunate, unexpected situations. But that would be, her voice would be one of the best ways to introduce the project. So I'm just going to quickly take you all to what she has to say. I hope you are able to hear her.
Hello, Shobna from Queering. Today I'd like to talk to you about Queer Inc. Archives, a major project that we launched in February 2023. Our vision is to record the lived experiences of LGBTQIA plus Indians and present it in a manner that places it as part of Indian history. It becomes part of our national narrative. And you will hear more about this in the coming months or days.
No, I'm sorry. It wasn't audible, is it?
There's some kind of background noise happening, like somebody speaking. I don't know if somebody's not on mute or what's happening, but that's making it difficult to hear. So there's somebody, like we can constantly hear somebody speaking in the background.
Okay, is it better now? Should we once again just try? You're still hearing sounds?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's somebody speaking constantly. So we need to, yeah, it's gone silent now, I think. Oh, no, it's back.
It's back. Okay.
Yeah. Can
Um,
you, there
I
are
just
some people not muted. So,
I don't know
okay,
if
no,
it's
most people are
me.
muted. Yeah.
I
In
think
February
everybody's muted.
2023. Our vision is to record the lived experiences of LGBTQIA plus Indians and present it in a manner that places it as part of Indian history. It becomes part of our national narrative. And you will hear more about this in the coming months or days.
Okay, I really hope that this was better. But otherwise, yeah, this is an invitation to you all to perhaps follow Queer India Archives on Instagram. And there is a lot more about the project, about its team members, about its processes that you can catch up. That you can catch up on through the social media videos and posts. Okay. Next, I must introduce the collaborators. Agents of Ishq doesn't really need introduction. I think everyone knows of the groundbreaking work or paradigm shift work that they have been pursuing, but we definitely need to know. We definitely need to know the two agents who are joining us. Anshumaan Sathe does visual design for Agents of Ishq and is a visual artist and illustrator based in Mumbai. They are interested in queerness, desire, art, and storytelling. Their work is often personal, often political, and always filled with humor and heart. Sameera Iyengar is a creative producer at Parodevi Pictures, as well as Agents of Ishq, as well as a theatre person and facilitator. She is keenly interested in the interplay of arts and society. Her work in theatre spans creating experiences that spark critical thought and engagement while being eminently enjoyable. Thank you both for your efforts and enthusiasm and accepting this invitation, thinking through about this masterclass. My job here is done. They are really going to take us through. One important thing, we had initially planned this for a Sunday, so we had kept 2 hours in mind for the masterclass. Perhaps 2 hours seems needed also perhaps for a masterclass. So while the poster says 6 to 7:30, we do plan to keep you engaged until 8 p.m. And we hope that you will all stay on. But in case you cannot, we would understand. So with that, over to you both. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Go
you
ahead.
so much,
Yeah.
Ishita. Thank you so much, Ishita. And thank you for the introductions as well. I am Anshuman, but you can call me Anshu. My pronouns are she and they. And I feel like this scarf that I'm wearing has become like a permanent fixture for any sort of queer thing I go to. So like it has seen everything from parties to workshops to dates to like protests, everything. So it is like truly like it's like a constant companion with me at this point for any queer thing that I do. And yeah, I'm like really excited to be here and so excited to walk everybody. I know it's a Wednesday evening, but I think queerness is disruptive. And so Wednesday is the middle of the week. And so we are here to disrupt the middle of the week, disrupt your week also with queerness and with a lot of desire, with a lot of joy, with a lot of ishq. And yeah, over to you, Sameera.
Yes, no, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for being here on a Wednesday evening, like Anshuman said. We are eager to take you through some of the work that we do at AOI and how we think about creating narratives in general and queer narratives in particular. So I'm going to hand it back to Anshuman to start us off.
Awesome. So I'm just going to share my screen. I just also like to give a heads up that there will be a few links to like, certain pieces that we will be sharing in our chat. So do keep an eye out on the chat and our colleague Kanishka will be sharing the links. So yeah, and just like keep an eye out in the chat, eye out for the links in the chat. And there is also a set of very quick activities that we'll be doing using the Mentimeter, which is like an online tool. So I will walk you folks through how to use the Mentimeter when we get to that section of the presentation. But for now, I'm going to share my screen and hope that everybody is able to see it properly. Give me 1 second. Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Lovely, lovely.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So yes, welcome to our masterclass, which is called "How to Build a Satrangi World." And as Sameera mentioned, we'll be talking about like AOI's Agents of Ishq's approach to like creating a queer archive, talking you through some of like the approaches that we've taken in the past, our design approaches, our storytelling approaches, what are the things that like really really stand out to us, what kind of stories we choose, so on and so forth. So yeah, agent Sameera, would you like to just like very quickly describe and give like an introduction to Agents of Ishq as well?
Yeah, sure, I can. Did you want to go ahead with our
Icebreaker
intro
activity
fun
first.
game first? Yeah, I think let's do that first and then
Okay.
come back to that, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Okay, cool.
So
Yes.
yeah, we like to go ahead, Anshumaan. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a second. I'm not able to. There we go. Okay. So yeah, this is just all of the social media. We'll get back to later. But so for the introductory activity, just to loosen everybody else up, we're going to play a very quick game called the Desi Pawn Star Name Generator. It's pretty self-explanatory. You have to basically use your birth month and your birthday to figure out what your very sexy, very Atrangi Desi Pawn Star name is. So, for example, my birthday is the 5th of April, and my Desi Pawn Star name will be Petticoat Officer, which I think is quite appropriate. And I'm going to use it every time I'm doing anything with anyone in the bedroom. So yeah, I think this is like a very fun game. Would everybody quickly want to go around and just like participate?
We can just put it in the chat as well.
Yeah,
we
we can
do it
quickly just put
together.
in the
Yeah.
chat as well. Otherwise, what we can also do is there is a Mentimeter link.
People are putting Anshumaan.
Okay.
Can go back to that so people can see it, no?
Yeah. लगातार भाभी खुला जन्नत. Kurta pad officer. Oh my god. Petticoat. I spotted a fellow petticoat. There is another Aries in the chat. Very cool. Lalchi Kamma. Very cool. I hope everybody, now that everybody has officially gotten their Desi Pawn Star name designation, I think this is a great primer, a great way for us to launch into the rest of the presentation. And henceforth, we will all be referring to each other just by Desi Pawn Star names. I'm kidding. Yeah. So we are now at a section where I will require everybody to head over to whatever device you are using. Just go to www.mentimeter.com, and it will give you, there'll be like a small prompt that asks you to enter a code. And I hope the code is visible to everybody. This is the code that you can put in. Thank you so much for sharing it, Ishita. And Ishita has also shared the code in the chat.
Is it 1004 or I004, Anshumaan?
It's 1004.
Okay, all right.
66891004. I think let's wait for like just about a minute so that everybody is able to head to the Mentimeter as well. Is everybody able to access it? I think we can go ahead. So how this works basically is you will be able to see a question in front of you. And there's going to be like a series of questions, and you just have to type in your answers. Like if you went to a queer, so the first question that we're asking is that if you went to a queer archive, what would you like to see? What would you like to find there? And like, what kind of stories would you like to see? Passion, love, technology. Okay. Section 377, of course. Activism, handwritten letters. Lovely. Everybody's like desires are coming out as a bhar bhar ke. Struggling. So am I. Anime. I love whoever said anime because anime was one of my like most interesting queer awakenings of mine happened in anime. Community, camaraderie, personal diaries, zines. All right, very cool. I think we can like wait for another just about like another 30 seconds while everybody else like also just like populates types in this word cloud. Lovely. Can we move on? Is everybody able to see all of the words that are there in front of them as well? Lovely. Great. Fashionable clothes. I love that. Belongingness. Some very, very interesting words and interesting thoughts have come out in this Mentimeter activity, which we will, of course, be building on as we go ahead. Okay. So this is a Mentimeter activity, but we can also have like a very quick, very short discussion about this as well. The question we're asking is what kind of story must be recorded in a queer archive and why? So for example, it could be we can all take like collectively take like about a couple of minutes to think about this and put in our answers into the Mentimeter, and then we'll have just like a very quick discussion about it as well. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Lovely, lovely. Queer intimacies, historical queer stories of discovery, love story, everyday love. Lovely, beautiful. Hmm. All right. So I think we have. Has everybody entered their answers? I hope everybody has like put in, or there's people still adding their answers in. No worries. I think we can all keep populating this word cloud as well. But yes, you are actually meant to see the word cloud on the shared screen. Are you not able to see the word cloud on your Mentimeter? Ah,
On the
oh,
Mentimeter, it is visible.
once you go to the Mentimeter, I think it should.
Hmm.
Well, but
It
actually,
is
if you
visible.
want, I can also just share it while we're having the discussion. Actually, I can also quickly share the Mentimeter as it's looking on my screen. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Lovely. Is everybody able to see the Mentimeter now? Okay, okay, lovely, lovely.
Is there a possibility of showing the earlier one, if in case people weren't able to see it, or do
Sure.
we not
Yeah, we
have
can
that?
show the
Yeah,
earlier one
yeah.
as well. Yeah.
So just show both word clouds.
Yep.
I mean, the larger stuff points to what more people have said, the larger
Hmm.
words, obviously. And
Yeah.
yeah. So that's
So, yeah.
the,
This is the first word cloud where we talked about if we went to a queer archive, what would we like to see? What kind of things would we like to find there? And the next one, which is the one that we're going to be discussing right now, is what kind of story must be recorded in a queer archive and why? So yeah, if everybody is able to see the word cloud, I think it's very interesting that coming out stories is obviously like larger than all of the other ones. And I think it also points to like, how we think of queer stories and how we think of queer narratives as well, because like coming out has historically been such a big part of the way we tell queer stories, right? And so we see that reflected here. But I think it would be interesting also to talk a little bit about like, all of the other things that people have said here as well. Sameera, would you also like to just like pitch in and like moderate this discussion a little bit?
yes, I'll take it from here. It's actually lovely to see. Anshumaan, if we can go back to our PowerPoint, because
PowerPoint?
I think this is a great, I think this is a great
Sure.
way to pick up from what AOI does and then lead into that. I'm also being conscious of time. So
Sure. Yes. Okay.
let's lead into that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you everyone for giving us your input. And it's quite lovely to see the kinds of inputs that come in. And I'm good. I'd like to link that a little bit into the kind of work that AOI does. Anshumaan, can we go back to the AOI universe slide? The one at the top? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when we set up AOI, one of the things that AOI is, we're a multimedia project, as most of you will know, and a digital multimedia project. And for us, it's really important as we create the narratives, any narrative that we create, that we take a look at which voices are silenced or which voices are villainized. Right? There are many silences that happen because stuff is taboo or stuff is not talked about socially, or there is discomfort around topics. And AOI really focuses on trying to get those conversations coming out. We also are. And of course, we're in the gender, sexuality, sex ed space. We're also very keen to talk about all of this in the Indian context. Right? For us, it's really important that we know, because so much of what information that we get is from the West, which doesn't necessarily speak directly to our context. And when we're looking at an Indian context, we're looking across India. Right? We're looking at language, culture, social context, etc. And we try very hard to make sure that we go into all those spaces. We are also really want to look at people beyond identity, right? We see each experience as unique. We believe that the experiences are heterogeneous, but while each experience is unique, we also feel each experience has something to feed other experiences. That in the looking at each heterogeneous experience, we are also gaining a larger sense of the world we live in, and we are getting a larger idea of pleasure, desire, who we are, what we care about, etc. And the other thing that we, of course, as you've seen, is we like to have a lot of fun. So while we make sure that our conversations are serious, are substantial, we're also we're also always making sure pleasure, fun, desire is part of the conversation. And what we do when we create all this, part of the reason we are doing this is because we see pleasure as an entry point that most people can access, right? We want this to be a public discourse. We want this to be a public conversation. We want what we put out there to not only reflect the lives of people and their desires and their questions, but we also want it to be something that other people want to easily access and feel is for them. So the social media space, as well as the fact that the discourse is to be public, to be shared, to be enjoyed together. And what has happened over time with AOI is therefore a lot of our work has become co-created, because right from the beginning, people have felt able to access our work and connect with it. What they've also done is they have constantly written in and also shared their stories, etc. So I will do a very quick recap of what we've done in the place of queer narratives. We, of course, do work across many kinds of narratives, but I'll quickly recap how we've looked at queer narratives. This picture of the universe is sort of a guideline, and in fact, looking at the word clouds that were coming up, it was quite lovely because it was overlapping so much with some of the things that we feel we've understood over time that people do want and desire, but there's also more there, which is exciting for us because that's stuff to follow into the future. So when we look at the universe of queer narratives, what are we looking at when we are trying to build that universe, trying to build a sense of what counts as queer story, universe, etc. Can we go to the history slide, Anshuman? We've done this in three major ways. We've collapsed it for you here, and we've done this in three major ways. We talk about histories, we talk about, and archives are often seen as places to go for the past, to understand what has happened in the past. But we also very much look at lived experiences, like what is happening now, what is the history we are creating today, and we also look at what is culture, like what is queer culture. So if we can go back to the history slide, Anshuman, I'll just talk a little bit more about it. So what are we doing when we're looking at history? Right? What are the kinds of things that we are looking? We are looking at what we've done so far is we've looked at certain pioneering acts. We've looked at the first queer protests that happened in India. We've looked at we've taken stories of individuals. Riyad Wadia's story, pioneering filmmaker, putting queerness out into the public domain. We've looked at Firdaus Kanga's story, talking about one of the earliest people to talk about disability, queerness, and desire. We've done that kind of work. We've also asked questions like, hey, before the internet, how did people find each other? And Anshuman will take us into a deep dive into that later on. We've also looked at 1920s. There was a Hindi short fiction book about homosexuality, which created a big furor and in fact created a public discourse on homosexuality. So we go looking for these things. We've also looked at even earlier than that, when we go to the love story between Babar and Babri from Babar's memoirs, where he talks about his love for this young boy, and it's a very beautifully written work. So we really try to find out what has been India's history and over time, and what are the different angles in which we can look at. So we also look at language, the history of language. What is the Desi and international history of the word lesbian? So we go into all of these spaces, again, pointing back to what I said earlier, trying to see what has not been talked about enough, what is missing, what needs to be there, but what are the gaps? And we constantly, every time we get a scent of a gap, we go diving into there, find some research, find some collaborators, and try to create something beautiful. Because for art, for us, everything we do, the content we create, there's art and beauty. And again, Anshuman will take us into a deeper dive on that later. But art and beauty is really important. Not only because it's pleasure and it's enjoyable, but it also allows us to look at things not as fixed, but allows us to have different entry points. So everything we are seeing and reading, we are allowed to come into it and connect with it in our own way. If we can move on to the next one. So for lived experiences, we do a lot of, like I said earlier, we get in a lot of people are requesting, people have been very generous wanting to share their personal stories. And we get a lot of requests, and we work very closely with people to write their stories out so that they become, so that we can have stories that people find easy to access and can also enjoy reading. And we get some beautiful art made with those stories as well. And we also specifically got and interview people. If we have a question in mind, if we feel there's an area that we would like to know more about, then we got and do a whole bunch of interviews. And in that process, we get stories of, dating, struggles, awakening to your own sexuality, struggling with sexualness more than perhaps homosexuality, first kisses, now, going off out of my head now, but also we also go across India's geography and culture, like I said. So we also seek out voices from which, different circles work in silos, and we don't want to have those silos. We need to be looking at the expanse of experience as well as culture across India. So that's something that we very actively do, which again, Anshuman will deep dive into in a bit. And then when we look at culture, we look at how is queer, next slide please, Anshuman. We then look at how is queer culture created, right? So we've created a queer map of Bombay to show us what are the queer spaces and resources. We've looked at music, art, poetry, which is either created from a queer space or queer in its sensibility, right? And we've had people play with that and tell stories of that. We've also looked at queer language, like I've said before. What is the history of Desi queer language? What are the words that come from different parts of the country? How do people locally use language to express queerness? So in this way, we really try to build the universe of what it means to be Desi and queer in India, but we're also doing it in a way that it's not siloed into the conversation, like only by queer people for queer people. It's to assert that, the frames through which we enter, if we're talking about dating, and you're talking about stories of trans people dating, that story has something for everybody who's interested in dating, right? So we are actually saying that all of these stories are human stories, which have a particular inflection because they're queer, and it is there for all of us to engage with and meet with, because we seek those areas of intersectionality where we can meet and have a conversation together, so that the world is large in its expanse. So I'm going to stop here. I wanted to give you a very quick sort of summary of how we approach these things. And I would like to hand it back to Anshuman, who's going to now deep dive us into the format that we'll follow, so that it's not just us yapping, is Anshuman will deep dive us into a couple of things under each of these heads: history, lived experiences, culture, and then we'll stop for like a short Q&A, maybe a couple of questions if people, or discussion if people want to have, and then we'll move on. So we'll have 3 sections which we'll go through in that way, and then we can open up for more discussion or questions or whatever at the end of that.
Hmm.
So Anshuman, over to you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sameera. So the first section that we're going to be talking about is, of course, like the histories. On Agents of Ishq, we have this lovely hashtag that we have coined, or like a term, so to speak, that we have coined, and it's called Histories of Ishq. And Histories of Ishq kind of broadly looks at like all of the histories of like queerness, of desire, of love, all the ways in which like desire, love, ishq has like sort of expressed itself throughout the ages. And so when it comes to documenting queer histories, we we always cast our net wide. We've looked at like many things. We've looked at, as Sameera mentioned, starting right from Emperor Babar to all the way to the 1990s. And like we've like there's always like such a curiosity within the team also to just like kind of uncover all of the hidden stories, all of the hidden histories that are there. And it's led us to like many like beautiful, like it's led us to a lot of like beautiful research as well. So one of the stories that I would like to talk about is about the history of this book called Chocolate. And of course, it's like it's like a very desi way. It's a very colloquial way of like pronouncing chocolate. And yeah, I think Sameera has pasted a link in the chat. So if everybody could just like open the link, it'll take you to our Agents of Ishq website, and it'll link to this particular piece. So we can all just like quickly go through the piece. And I'm going to, yeah, I think we can all take like 2 minutes to quickly go through the piece.
While we are going through it, I did want to say something I missed saying, that a lot of our work is put out in both Hindi and English, so that the accessibility to people increases across. Those are the 2 languages we are working in right now. And it has enabled us to reach out to very many people across the country. I think you can pick it up, Anshuman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Chocolate is essentially the story of this particular post. Chocolate is like a book that was written. It's a collection of short fiction stories, mostly written in Hindi, and the entire book is about it. It's about homosexual experiences in Indian cities. Now, it is like we tried looking into it, and we tried like looking at are these actual stories of like actual lived stories of people, or are these like fiction, are these things that someone like people have written under like a ghost name. And I think it seems to be like a mixture of both. But the writer working under like an anonymous name of Ugra, and Ugra means extreme, and so I feel like that like very nicely points to the kind of stories that were there included in the book as well. These were these kind of like reflect the attitudes that were present in society at the time, talking about homosexuality. It's all very like it's all framed from a very dramatic, very scandalous, and like the language that's used in the like while writing the stories is also very salacious. And this book is like very important, and it's like particularly like significant, because even though the stories are presented, and like even though the stories are presented as something very salacious, even though the book itself raises like a sort of like moral eye towards a lot of these stories, it's important because this is one of the earliest times that homosexuality was discussed publicly, and not just discussed, but like people were responding to it, obviously, because like it's such a hot topic. People were responding to it, people were like debating about it, and it kind of and it got so like it got so saturated in its discourse that a lot of people actually coined a term for this particular thing called for this particular brand of storytelling, and they called it gaslit. So gaslit is chocolate type literature which was considered obscene, which was considered that had literature that basically had a lot of inflammatory potential. So I think it's very important because when we look at some of the early history of how homosexuality, queerness was discussed in Indian society, it kind of like chocolate becomes like a very important story to tell, because it not only documents it not only documents what people were saying about it, but also like the larger debates about it, and larger debates about art, storytelling, artistic freedom. Many people also, like many writers of the time, Munshi Premchand included, Mahatma Gandhi included, also responded to chocolate, and all of them had like very very many things to say. Some people were saying that it is obscene, it is inflammatory, and it is not okay. It is like it's actually harming society to put these kind of stories out into the world.
So in terms, if I can jump in,
Yeah.
Anshumaan, for a second. So in terms of a queer archive, this is actually one of the earliest stories where you clearly see that when homosexuality is fronted, it becomes national. It becomes a national issue, right? Which is why everything is everybody's responding, from well-known writers to Gandhi to whoever, right? So that becomes it becomes like Anshuman was saying. It's not only showing us how society feels about it, but it also shows how it connects right up to the national level and how it has stayed a national issue in that sense over time. And as you can see, right now it's continuing to be a national issue for us, right? We're constantly fighting at the level of the state for rights.
Yeah.
Anshuman, yeah.
Very much. And I think it's also interesting because when we were writing out this piece, we kind of wanted to honor the original style of the original text, that is chocolate, which is very obscene, very, very scandalous, very, 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 very inflammatory, quote unquote, so to speak. And so sometimes one of the approaches that we take to, sort of telling these stories is we want to highlight the humor, highlight the absurdity also. Uh, and we kind of do that in the way we write out like the story and the way we tell the story as well. So visually speaking also, while it's also like one of the things that we keep in mind when designing for one of the things that we kept in mind while designing for chocolate is that we wanted to use the faces of like actual people, all of the people that were responding to it, and all of the pamphlets, all of the propaganda that was being put out at the time. And we wanted to give it like a very sort of like vintage tabloidy, like a very vintage tabloidy sort of aesthetic. And so you see that reflected in how the post is written and how the post is told and how the story is told. And a lot of times, especially when talking about something as contentious as chocolate, like I mentioned earlier, it becomes important to approach it with a sense of humor also. And so if you look at this third side over here, we also like play on how we think of our historical figures, and we also have um a few like funny asides that they say where they're commenting on the story. For example, here Gandhiji is saying spinning stories to prevent homosexuality is a noble cause. And so I think this was like one of the one in terms of like tracing a history of queerness in India. Chocolate kind of gives like one sort of perspective. And I think the story of chocolate is still very, very relevant and very, very important today, because a lot of the debates that were a lot of the ways in which people were responding back then are still ways in which people respond to any sort of salacious and scandalous, so to speak, material today. And so yeah, chocolate proved to be like a very important and like a very interesting piece to sort of write and also create the visuals for and put out into the world. The next piece that I would want to talk about is we're fast forwarding, I think, a lot and going to the 1990s. And we call this piece The Lesbian Postbox of New Delhi. And this is a piece about how, before the internet existed, before there were like, before it became easy, so to speak, to find queer people. Um, this is a story of how queer women specifically found each other, and it's through a post box. Now, the post box was called Sakhi's Post Box, and it was started by a group, a collective of women in Delhi. And the way the postbox functioned is that many people from all over they sort of like put out advertisements in newspapers. They also put out advertisements in very famous gay magazines of the time, Bombay Dost, so on and so forth. And people, like women especially from all over the country, sort of like responded to these advertisements. And women from all over the country were like writing letters to the Sakhi's post box, and the Sakhi's post box, I think, at one point also connected the different women who were writing, and so women were writing to each other. And so, when we think of like queer history, I think a lot of times gay men's history is kind of fronted, and we also like there's more awareness about gay men's history than there is about like queer women's, or like queer trans people's history. And earlier, one of the things that Sameera also mentioned is that like AOI is very good at sort of pointing out what is missing, pointing out like what is hidden, what is yet to be documented, what is yet to be talked about. And so in that way, this is like a lesser known, it's not as visible a part of queer history in India. And also, I think whenever we think of history, and whenever we think of like whenever our tendency is to deem politics and protests and riots and things like that as like significant, or like very historically important. But this is a very like warm, very sort of sweet story of like queers finding each other and building communities. And it shows how friendships, community, activism, romance all sort of coexisted beautifully in this one space. And what is especially interesting about this particular story, and like is one of my favorite parts about it, is that so many times in a lot of the letters that the Sakhi's postbox received, the desires of women from all kinds, like, from all across the country kind of like, came spilling out very fervently in the letters that they wrote to each other. So these were, and like, this is how queer women were forming friendships. They were also forming like a long distance romantic relationships with each other, and all sorts of relationships, all sorts of things were being done basically through the Sakhi's postbox. It's also very significant because it also meant that some of the boundaries of class and caste also got dissolved a little bit, because these were women writing from all sorts of places. It also meant that like like many different kinds of people were also interacting with each other. So I think that's also like one very beautiful fact, and like one very beautiful part of the history of the Sakhi's postbox. I would also talk like and because the story is such a like it's so saturated with the desires of women, it's set in like a very particular time. One of the things that Agents of Ishq does is also like we want to make sure that the visual language that we use, and like the way that we do a lot of our visual storytelling, we kind of have a wide variety, and we also sort of make sure that we root it in a culture that's very familiar. So, for example, in the design for the Sakhi's postbox, we've used like, of course, we've used like, the format of the inland letter, but we've also used like calendar art, and we've also used like, images of like Sri Devi, of like, of Falguni Pathak, of Kajol running in like the Ganne ka khet towards each other. Like we really wanted to show this idea of like queer women finding each other, and like, this metaphor ki like, जैसे शाहरुख और काजोल गन्ने के खेत में, mustard के खेत में, they're running towards each other. That became like a visual through line then for the design of the whole story. And so I think drawing on all of these elements, all of the visual culture that is around us is very important in the work we do at AOI, because it kind of not only establishes context, and not only establishes like us like grounds the stories and establishes like a sense of time, a sense of place, but I think the more familiarness that we infuse the posts with, it also kind of helps these stories to become that much more approachable and become that much more pleasurable also. Because one of the things we also want to do is like we want to kind of like make sure that like when we tell queer stories, it's not just for other queer people, it's for everyone. And I feel like especially when, say, when I'm talking to like my grandparents, or when I'm talking to like my parents, my aunt, even like the auto wala or like the bus driver who I interact with every day on my way to work. it's it becomes that much more easier for them to engage if if like the way the story is told feels loving and inviting and familiar. So Sameera, you're muted.
Also, the cultural references are known and already carry an evocation, right? That's why
Yeah.
Bollywood is so powerful, because everybody's already connected to Bollywood. It's a very inclusive frame. So when you put this kind of a cultural reference there, people immediately get the kind of love you're talking about, that you're bypassing a lot of taboo by going straight into this kind of conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it also allows us to be very playful, right, visually, because obviously Sridevi and Rekha and Kajol were not writing letters, lesbian love letters to each other. But in our collective
Who
imagination,
knows?
in our collective imagination, these are all of our crushes. These are all of the women that we grew up admiring, women that we think of as queer also, and they're also queer icons, right? So it also allows us to set our imagination free and be very playful in the way we sort of tell these stories. And I think that playfulness is a very important part of like telling stories beautifully. And I think like this is one of the favorite things, one of my favorite stories that we've told so far on Agents of Ishq.
So
I'll
Anshu, I'm going to, I think you want to quickly just take a minute to quickly just sum these up, and then we can open it out for any conversation, because
yeah.
Sorry,
Uh,
I'm helping with the timekeeping here,
Of
so you'll
course,
see
of
me
course.
do this
I
all.
have a
Yeah.
tendency to ramble a lot,
No
especially when I
problem.
get like very
We also want to share a lot. So yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, of course, yeah. So yeah, and if you want, you can go on the AOI website and look through the hashtag histories of Ishq. There's like many different queer stories that we've told. We've also told the story of Babar Babri, again, and it's also here instead of like inland letters and like found images, we've used images of like Persian miniatures and like Persian paintings to evoke a different kind of beauty and like to evoke like a different kind of like yearning romantic atmosphere. So yeah, and this is also some like examples from like the story of Babar and Babri. It was like a gay love story between Babar and a court boy called Babri, and Babar writes about it in his memoir called the Babar Nama. And yeah, and so yeah, I think in Histories of Ishq, the three, if I were to boil it down, the three main principles would be like variety, not just in terms of like the variety of stories, but also variety of like visual styles. Because Persian paintings are not technically from India, but they have such a like sense of beauty around them that they help in creating like a certain atmosphere, and they do help in creating like the mood and like evoke feelings when you're looking at something. I think like when you read a piece of text and then you see like an image with it, the image kind of does a little bit of what the text cannot, right? Like it's like I feel like whenever we are working on the images, um these are
Yes,
all
the image and the text are working together to
together.
evoke the entire
Yeah,
story. That's what that, and we are very clear about that. So there's actually a lot of back and forth between the
yeah,
writer writes, the graphic creates. They come up with the ideas together, and then they edit on each other, so that
yeah,
the graphics is doing the best of what it can do, and the text is succinctly and precisely doing the best of what it
yeah,
can do.
yeah.
So
And
that's
so
the
this is
mode that's
also
followed, right?
and so
We
this
have
is
a
also like a format that we have created of like a way
yeah,
of telling stories where it's not
yeah.
it's somewhere between a comic, somewhere between a graphic novel, somewhere between like and it's become like its own format. It's like become like a piece of art of its own.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So we have a question from Hina asking
Hmm.
if we can tell them more about the research process. Would you like to take that, Anshuma, or should
Sure.
I take it? Yeah. Okay. Go
Yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
I think we can both sort of pitch in.
Okay.
So usually when we do start off research, I think it mostly comes like whenever whoever is there in the team, it mostly comes from a place of excitement. So for example, whenever we were talking about like the Sakhi's post box or like
I'm going to
whenever,
step back. I'm going to
yeah,
step back for a second, Anshuman. Actually, what also happens is that we ideate together. So a lot of
yeah,
the ideas that come up tend to be ideas the team wants to do. So you already have the excitement generated from there,
hmm,
and then on to what Anshuman is saying. Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's like just like it's kind of like just a process of playing detective almost, because sometimes what you find on the internet is not the full picture. Sometimes you find conflicting things. So the way that AOI does research is again like very intensive. It's a very rigorous process, and we also talk to a lot of people. We also, for example, for the Sakhi's post box, and later on for the queer map of India also, queer map of Bombay also, we do also make it a point to like talk to people who were around when these things were happening, who have their own anecdotes to share and things like that also. And whenever we're taking something from like mythology or taking something from like ancient history, for example, like Babar Babri, the Babarnama as a piece of text is like very easily available. And so for that, it was just a question of like, hunting down the most like succinct and most like, most detailed sort of translation of the Babarnama, and picking out like what part of the whole text we want to highlight, what thread of the whole text that we want to tell in our story. So yeah.
But we're always driven. We don't want to tell an academic. How do we know the text existed? By having our ears and eyes open and different people picking up different things and getting excited about it. Often we just hear about it from somewhere,
Yeah.
or have seen it somewhere. Yes, Rishabh, please go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, I think you have been answering it by like with the progress in the narration itself. But so I understand that there is an approach to tell the past, right? So and that's a very good way to even like tell the past to everyone actually. But uh, so basically, like for example, Baburnama, right? So where that description is there, so that would have been sort of concised within some before and after sort of a narration, right? And this post also, like the magazines over there, I remember somebody telling that they were the last sort of page of the magazines basically, and there were these very small paragraphs, so that like they were very sort of hidden within the magazines itself, so that even if somebody by chance sort of get hold of the magazine, they directly don't sort of shuffle through it or whatever. So I mean, they were sort of the sort of the how they were represented or how they were communicated back then. They had sort of some fear to itself and everything. So that is also there, right? And so do you also? So the question is, do you also keep the parallel which was in the past on the site so that people get the whole idea of it?
What do you mean by that? Sorry, Rishabh, if you can just clarify when you say keep the parallel. Do we keep the fact that it's hidden
No,
on the
no.
site?
Do we keep like how they were actually represented or how they were actually sort of like for this magazine example, right? So they were these columns and narrations in itself, right? So do we actually also keep like in the sense a parallel sort of a column in the sense where we can access and see how they were actually communicated, or you understand what I'm trying to say?
Do we keep the resource material available? Is what
Yeah,
you're
base
asking,
of
right?
basically the originals. Yeah.
Of course,
For
yeah.
somebody to refer to.
Yeah. So the resource material is usually like listed out as a bibliography at the bottom of like every single like story that we put out, and every single post that we put out also on Instagram. And even and like of course like whatever stories that we tell are building on also existing narratives and existing pieces, right? The Babarnama is an existing piece. Chocolate is also an existing piece, and so oftentimes we also just like take like straight excerpts from these. And like a lot of times you'll also see like quotes from the Babarnama or quotes from some of the letters that were written to Sakhi Postbox, quotes from some of the like things that were written in the magazine in the chocolate book, sorry, not magazine. All of these things are also there, and so like it in terms of like the like how we tell the story, we kind of do our own writing, and wherever and like wherever we want to sort of illustrate the writing, we have these like sort of excerpts and have these sort of quotes come in from the research material.
Paramita?
I just wanted to add something. I'm also part of Agents of Ishq, so I just thought I would add something to what Anshumaan said in response to the question. Can I?
Yeah, please.
So, I mean, I think that when we speak of a queer archive, we don't mean it in the traditional sense of a place where you will come to find research documents, right? Because we are an arts project, and by archive, we mean to have an endless repertoire of renditions of experiences. So while we have spoken at length about Histories of Ishq, there are many contemporary narratives also alongside these histories.
Yeah.
So
We'll get into that next,
Yeah.
Paramita.
yeah. Oh, sorry. So, but I think like it's all part and parcel of one archive for us. The past, the future, the present is a kind of contemporaneous way of thinking about queerness. Because if we read, as Sameera mentioned, what happened around chocolate, if you read the post, then you can make a connection between what is happening in our lives right now and what was happening then, and realize that every moment of time is modern in the time that it's happening. and it always has some sets of conflicts in it, as well as some kinds of attempts and freedoms in it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I'll just quickly answer the question about Babri, that it was known in history classrooms. Oftentimes, Unnati, what I would say is that sometimes stuff that is known in classrooms is not known in the public domain. And what AOI does is put things out there, stories that we find delicious or interesting, that tells us a little bit about our past or a little bit about the universe that we, that we exist in, because we very much see ourselves as public discourse. That's really where our focus is. And we are celebrating love of all kinds. We are also saying love of all kinds existed at all times. And it was celebrated. And Babar is quite amazing that he writes about this at that time in such evocative poetic language. And that really drew us. And often what we are responding to, that we are loving, is what we are then sharing out to other people to offer it to them to love in some sense. Yeah. Shall we move on,
Sure.
Anshumaan, to the next bit? We talked about lived experiences.
Of course. Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
Just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, as Sameera mentioned earlier, the three ways in which we sort of there is histories, of course. One of the other things that we also do, and one of the other ways in which we sort of have built this archive of queer stories at AOI is also by talking about people's contemporary narratives. And by contemporary narratives, I mean people talking about their own lives, about their own sexual journeys, about their own sort of journeys of discovery in their own words, in their own sort of in their own voices. So AOI has a large archive of people talking about their own sexual journeys, talking about their own lives in their own words. And it's this, again, it's a new term that we have coined called the personal essay, where people are just talking about their lives and writing about their lives as a long form essay. So in this section, I think there are, again, a couple of pieces that I would like to highlight. The first one is this beautiful piece called Watch Me As I Fall in Love. And this is, of course, Kanishka, if you can just share the link to the piece in the chat. So Watch Me As I Fall in Love is a collection of so we spoke to 5 trans people about their experiences of dating, romance, falling in love. And I think one of the very I think one of the reasons why this sort of approach is important, especially when talking about trans people and trans experiences, is that oftentimes when we talk about transness, we always the conversation is very stilted towards being very medicalized and being all about trauma, all about coming out, all about all about the struggles. But rarely do we ever get to see trans people as beautiful objects of desire, of beautiful as beautiful adults who have fantasies, who have desires, who yearn and love and fall in love constantly all the time and get their hearts broken, or rather get our hearts broken, I should say. So I think this is one of the ways in which we went and spoke to 5 trans people. We spoke and asked them about what is it like dating as a trans person, what is it like finding romance. And a lot of these stories, some of these stories are very sweet, some of them are a little bittersweet, some of them are quite sad. But the point of this piece was to sort of again bring out a bouquet of experiences that people are able to sort of read. And again, I think especially when talking through the lens of lived experience, what it does is that one of the ways in which AOI tells stories is that we put experience first and not the identity. So for example, when we talk about dating or romance, or even we also have a piece where we ask lesbian women about their first kiss and how the experience of their first kiss was like. I think dating, romance, first kisses are things that everybody goes through, right? And things that everybody can relate to, and everybody has these experiences in their life. And so this is what we kind of want to highlight. We put these experiences first and we allow people to sort of enter the conversation on their own terms, and we never sort of foreground the identity. It's always the experience that is foregrounded. And the experience of a first kiss when you're a lesbian growing up in small town rural Maharashtra, how does that look like? What are the kind of struggles, what are the kind of jugadu ways in which you go after your love, after your desires? So yeah, I'm just
If I may just interject for a second, it also means that we are not approaching people through their identity, because
Yeah.
sometimes identities cause you have pre-existing um, attitudes towards identities, right? You're not siloing people, but you're also not allowing the identity to separate us. When you say first kiss, when you say dating, when you say any of those things, yeah, I want to know about dating. Okay, then this person, that person is able to talk about it, and you are able to get in through those experiences. They create very inclusive frames, and all the work we do is constantly seeking inclusive frames.
Hmm.
You know, we don't want ghettos, right? We
Yeah.
want people
Yeah.
to be able to speak to each other across experiences, backgrounds, etc. Yeah.
Hmm.
Go ahead, Anshumaan. Yeah.
Lovely. And also, I think personally speaking, also, it's like when it's almost like sitting down with a friend and getting gossip about their life from them, right? Like there's all of us have that experience where we've just had our first kiss and we're so excited about telling all of our friends about our first kiss. And I think that's very much the sort of feeling and that comes across in these very beautifully written and like beautifully narrated stories. So all of these stories were also illustrated by Amruta Patil, who's like a very, very well known, and like, her work is so beautiful. And the images you see in front are actually illustrated by Amruta Patil. And I think this is one of the instances in, the thing that I was talking about earlier, where this is a great example of why beauty is important in telling stories also. Like when you look at this drawing, it immediately creates an atmosphere of intimacy, of warmth, of love. And because of the fact that it is a drawing and because of the fact that it's handmade, I think it also lends a sort of sense of touch to the entire visual. And I think that sense of touch is very, very important in all of the work that we do at Agents of
And
Ishq. If we're working digitally, sorry, yeah.
no, I just wanted to interrupt here to also point out that whenever we're doing any piece of content, we're actually thinking about what format we are going to do it in so that it evokes the feeling that we want to evoke as well. So this is one example of that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, this is also like a beautiful, another beautiful illustration from the series that again Amrita Patil has made. And I think what's really lovely about this is that it's all sorts of bodies and all sorts of people who are portrayed very beautifully. And I think it's also powerful in that sense, right? Because like we always tend to think of like a certain kind of body as beautiful, or like a certain kind of like uh, good looking body. But at Agents of Ishq, we always make sure that yes, that body is also there, but there's also many, many different kinds of there's body hair, there are people wearing binders, there are people who have like top surgery scars, and all of these details are actually like very integral to the beauty of the piece itself. And I think at Agents of Ishq, we're very good actually at like highlighting these particularities of the human body that makes the human body also beautiful. So like we are always like body hair is one of my favorite things to draw, and even in these paintings it's like the color and the textures of the skin are all very like they're come across like very, very gorgeously. And it's also one of the reasons why Agents of Ishq, we always strive to work with a wide variety of artists also. We've worked with many, many freelancers. We continue working with like many artists who are who illustrate for us, who kind of like also visually bring our stories to life. And one of the reasons we do that is because uh, everybody looks at the human body differently, right? Like everybody finds different things that are beautiful about the human body. And so working with a wide variety of artists kind of also lets this variety of like
Gaze.
interpretations of beauty also to come through in all of the work that we do. So yeah, this is also like another beautiful painting by Amrita Patil, and it's from the lesbian first kiss stories that I was talking about earlier. Yeah. So, oh, sorry. And the
Anshuman, before we get into the other things, I just want to interject one thing also. Stuff that we're not showing here, but we also do. We focused on queer narratives specifically, but even when we are doing stuff in other spaces, for instance, we did a bunch of work on self-managed abortions, right? We make sure that when we are talking, those spaces also have queer presence. So when we are talking about, say, menstrual health or self-managed abortions, whatever, we have trans men drawn into those spaces. We will even make sure that that is also a queer experience. So that is also part of what we do to so that there's an interlinkage. The intersection between queer experience and other things happening is also constantly kept in mind when we're writing content or when we're creating visuals around it. Back to you, Anshuman. Yeah.
Lovely. So I think here the second piece that I would like to talk about is a comic. And Kanishka, if you could just like share the link to the comic. Unfortunately, I uh, I have not included the images from that comic in the presentation, but I think if everybody can go and just like take a look at the link. Yeah, thank you so much. Kanishka, sorry, it's the other one, not Satrangi Ladki. This is the other link, the other comic link. In fact, let me just post it onto the chat. Sorry.
You can start talking about it,
Yeah,
Anshuman. It'll
yeah,
come.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a link that says Secret Loves. That is the link that we're all going to be referring to. Yeah. Okay. So this is actually a piece where we sort of like this is a comic that is based on an excerpt from a very iconic piece of work called Loving Women Being Lesbian in Unprivileged India, and it's a book written by Maya Sharma, who is like a lesbian author, activist, like everybody, like we all love her in the team. And this book is actually a collection of 10 stories of women from small towns in rural India. And what is really, really beautiful about this particular piece is that, like, we always think like popular narratives, or like, the ways in which we talk about queerness, it's always in a sort, like, we tend to think of it as something that's only found in urban spaces, that's only like, has a certain like westernized connotation to it. And there's also this idea that queerness is rare, or like, quote unquote, that it's like a minuscule minority. But I think what's really beautiful about these stories is all of these are stories from rural India. All of these are stories from like small towns, not urban, not metropolitan, like, places in India. And so it also kind of challenges that idea that queerness is like, is rare, because these stories in fact show that queerness is everywhere around us. And all of these stories, they're like, filled with so much complexity. They are filled with like, for example, in this particular story, the story of Kanak and Vimlesh, it's a story that Vimlesh is narrating to Maya Sharma. And they talk about like, how they had like a very sort of tumultuous, very, very summer fling sort of romance with this person called Kanak, who later on had to get married. And then and like, like they were both women, and they later on, Kanak was unhappy with her marriage, unhappy with her pregnancy. Then they exchanged letters where they talked about running away, but they couldn't, because like, they were living separate lives and like whatever. So I think what is really beautiful about these is that also these are all characters that are full of energy. The characters are also like very flirty, very, very sexy, very, very human. And in fact, at one point in the story, Vimlesh also like, Vimlesh also says, you ask what is our relationship, this is a love affair, I love her. And so all of these stories are very complex. They show both the struggle as well as the joy, and as well as the desire. And they show how all of like, the struggles and the joys and the desires are all actually intertwined. And one of my favorite things about this particular story is that, like, it also shows the various jugadu ways in which sort of desire finds ways to exist. Like, even if you're living in like a rural small town, in a small town in rural India, where like there's such an atmosphere of like oppression, where you're not, even as women able to step out of your house, there are still ways, there are women still find ways to go after their desires. They still find ways to sort of like, break to a certain extent the molds of society also. And so
I think, sorry, if I may interject for a second, Anshuman. So, if you look at if you just step back, zoom out a little bit and look at the queer universal narratives we're putting out there, we are putting out there post-box the Sakhis, right? At a time when there was no internet, when, even just 20, 25 years ago, we were like the way we can talk easily right now, that was just not the case, right? The silencing around queer experience and queer visibility was much higher. So you have that. So, and you have that in this same universe has those stories. It has the very many stories that Maya Sharma has put out, made into comic form. Some of those stories are about being silent. Some of those stories are about living visibilized. So you're also getting, again, a heterogeneous experience from across rural spaces. But we're also saying, hey, all of this is India's experience, right? You know,
Yeah.
all of this is India's experience. So you really look at what is it to be queer in India. You don't have one box or one silo into which you're putting it, but you're really looking at a heterogeneity. And that's one of the reasons you're going looking for these kinds of very different stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Yes.
Anshumaan. Yeah.
And even we worked with an artist called Vidha Samya for this particular. Yeah, we worked with an external artist whose name I'm forgetting, but I will link. All of the pieces, all of the accreditations are there in the links as well. But I think while we were working on the illustrations together for this particular piece, also, what was really important is that you show again, like it's very important to sort of establish a sense of place and show the surroundings for what they are. So in this particular story, we opted to go for like really nice, these warm sort of earthy tones. And again, the drawings are not very quote unquote finished. They're not very perfect looking drawings. They again have a sense of like, you when you look at them, they do look a little handmade. And you do get the sense that like, there's a human being who has lovingly sort of like created these illustrations and created these drawings. And so I feel like again, that sense of touch is like very, very important to all of the art that we create at AOI. And it's also very beautiful because there are so many like details in the illustrations as well. Like there's like calendars hidden away on the walls, the way the terrace is laid out, you have like pickles, like you have like things drying on towels on the terrace, things kept for pickling. And so all of these little details kind of help to again ground the story and like establish like a very, very particular Indian context in which the story is unfolding. So, and I think all of these things are there also purely for the purpose of like highlighting the beauty of the story. You know what I mean? Like this image of two people embracing on a terrace, just surrounded by this like large canopy of like trees and surrounded by large, beautiful towels around them of many, many colors. I think it's a very evocative image. So even like, while imagining how the story unfolds, there are details that we add in just for the sake of beauty, because beauty is important again in
And
storytelling.
also, for us at AOI, the idea of abundance is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that comes into the artistic expression that happens, especially when you talk about love stories, etc., etc. Yeah,
absolutely. Lovely.
I think, shall we move on to if people have any questions or yeah? If anybody has
Or
anything.
The second section where we talked about lived experiences. Yeah.
I'm sorry, just to interject before you saying, we find out the personal stories, some of them are written to us, some of them are ideas we have and we go out and we seek interviews with people. I just wanted to highlight that. You have something like an internal written document for voice, visual style, narrative guidelines. Go ahead, Anshumaan.
Yes, we do. We do have that internal, but like with every sort of space that has like developed like its own philosophy, this is also like a very top secret document. But of course, if you want to come and like just if you take a look at all of the entire like wealth of material on the AOI website, you will be able to get like a good sense of like our approach, and you will be able to get like a good sense of how we sort of approach not just queerness, but like how we show the human body, how we talk about sexuality, all of these things.
Please say Hina's question. The thing is, we don't have. It's not like it's not like brand guidelines. Okay, it's not like this color, this thing, etc., etc. It's more like we want our writing and our text, our visuals to achieve certain things. So the checklists that we have and the guidelines that we have are more to get us thinking about what we should do in order to create that. And that really is, as Anshumaan was saying, connected to the AOI philosophy. We want heterogeneous experiences, we want heterogeneous art, and we want, a variety of storytelling, because again, the way you tell stories, etc., is variety. We don't want, it's, I think when one feels the AOI style, if you look at it just visually, you won't feel the style, you'll feel the style and the feeling it brings up in you. So that's what I would say. Why is abundance important? I think abundance is an attitude. It's a larger philosophy to the world, that we don't come from a place of lack, but as human beings, we come from a place of abundance, and that is what AOI fundamentally celebrates. So we want to approach the world, and the politics that we talk about are we have nice manifestos up on our Instagram page, and we talk about the politics of pleasure, the politics of love. What does it mean? And those are all things where we can approach each other, live in the world with a sense of abundance, but also approach each other with a sense of abundance. And really, that's the political philosophy behind everything that AOI is trying to do.
Hmm.
So that's why I hope that answers your question, Ishita. Yeah. Monologue lesbian stories from West Bengal and Bangladesh. Thank you for that. We will note that down.
Absolutely.
I don't think we have. Is it in Bangla or in English?
Oh, it's in both. Lovely.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Deepika.
Thank you.
Shall we move on to the next section,
Yes.
the presentation? Okay,
Yeah.
lovely. So the next section is, of course, the section of the presentation called culture. And when I think culture like largely refers to, as Sameera mentioned earlier, also like not just history, not just like personal stories, but also like certain like the way that culture exists like all around us. I will let the work do like its own speaking for this, and I'm going to show you two examples and then like elaborate a little bit on why we like approach culture the way we do. But here, for example, the thing that you see in front of you is we had done this series called Desi Gay Lingo, and it's basically a collection of like slang terms from across India that are used by like Indian queer people, and these are like Hijra people. They're trans people from South India. They're also trans people from like North India, and it's like a collection of these like terms. And I think what's really wonderful about these terms is that oftentimes they serve also as a reminder of the fact that queerness is meant to be disruptive. It's also like queerness is not always polite, and it's always like rambunctious. It's also always like infused with a lot of sex appeal. So yeah, I think it's a documentation of slang words also that otherwise would have been lost. These are words from like a particular language called Ulti Bhasha that is used by Hijra people, Aravani people, trans people, and also like all sorts of queer people, all sorts of Desi queer people. And it's a mixture of Farsi. This is not like the Persian Farsi, but like a different sort of like dialect of it, called Farsi with like a hyphen over the A. And it's like Kothi language. And a lot of times this is the language that is used in public spaces by queer people, trans people, to be able to live their life openly in a sense, and to be able to like have conversations about like sex, or like have conversations about each other with each other while evading the police. Because a lot of times even like one of the people that we were speaking to while collecting the terms for this particular series, they mentioned how like police intimidation is like a fact of everyday life for many queer people, for many trans people, especially if you're a sex worker, especially if your livelihood comes from begging. And so where do trans people go to, like what do people do to get a sense of privacy in their life, and also to like get a sense of agency in their life as well. So this is a sort of like code word that like trans people have like developed over many years to be able to have conversations with each other, and also like in public spaces openly, loudly, and also evade police who might be dropping in or who might be listening in. So for this particular piece, we have worked with a lovely artist called Div Rodericks, and yeah, I think we can just like all take a little bit of time to go through all of these very beautiful, very sexy terms that have been collected. And I think when we are thinking of a queer archive, or like when we're thinking of building a queer archive, I think certain everyday parts of culture like this are also very important, because this is like these are terms that are very colloquial. These are terms that like trans people and queer people use in everyday conversation. And like when you sort of like include things like these that are like very like immediate everyday experiences, very ordinary in a sense also experiences of like of trans people, of queer people, it kind of like it also makes us reconsider the kind of things that should be there in an archive also, right? Like it's not just or like it's not just history, and it's not just politics, and it's not just like riots and things like that, but it's also like very like lived experiences like this. And a lot of times these terms also prove to be quite delightful, and they're all also like very, very rambunctious and naughty. So I think even like that's
I
like
think,
also why we
yeah,
include this, because like a lot of these films are very, very naughty, and we just like wanted to give a picture
I
of like
think that,
yeah,
yeah, I think the other thing that we recognize is that culture is created on the ground.
yeah,
Like often because the state has such a large presence that we're always looking at so and sometimes we do have, and we do often have to engage the state to fight our battles, right? In that, in that conversation, we often, sometimes culture gets homogenized in that conversation with the state. But the reality is that culture is always created on the ground, and therefore language comes from the ground, practices come from the ground, jugaad comes from the ground, how you navigate comes from the ground, and that's something we do keep in mind as we're telling all our stories.
absolutely. And
And
I
when you
think
do pieces like this, that reminds you very specifically how culture is created right at the ground level.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Anshumaan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sameera.
Yeah.
And also, I think in terms of like the visual language for this also, like we wanted it to have a sense of playfulness. We wanted it to have a sense of like, again, like sense like that you can actually go out and touch. For example, like the shepu here. I remember sitting with like the rest of the team, and for like a solid 15 minutes, we were all doing this to our screens, and we were all trying to figure out, okay, what kind of like shepu makes us feel like we are actually caressing and touching the shepu around the vulva. So like yeah, like we also, and in terms of the general format for this, we took inspiration from like again from calendar art. We took inspiration from a lot of like truck art that we see on the back, beautiful like very, very ornamental truck art that we see on the back of trucks on national highways. So that's another way in which we are also adding to like archiving. It's not just an archiving of stories and events, but it's also like a visual archive, like what kind of art gets included in the archive. Again, like the decision to make this in like a sort of like truck art style was also to give a sense like all of this is like queerness travels, and all of these terms have also traveled from one place to the one place of the one part of the country to the other. So we were immediately just like okay, so what if it looked like it was on the back of a truck? And so we usually don't think of like truck art as some as like art that should be there in like an archive, but I think these are very, very everyday and very, very ordinary. And like Sameera mentioned, these forms of art also come from the ground, and they have like a very particular kind of appeal, a very particular sense of space also, which is why it's important to include things like these in
Yeah.
any archive that we're building.
And they're incredibly beautiful. I mean, we are not
Yeah.
also buying into the hierarchy of art. I mean,
Yeah,
it is truck art is gorgeous, and
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yes,
Okay, next, should we go on?
absolutely. So the second piece that we're talking about is one of my favorite pieces of work that AY has ever created. It is a queer map of the city of Mumbai. And I think this piece is very interesting in terms of format, because this is a geographical map as well as a historical map. And in a sense, it's almost like a queer Mumbai darshan. And we like there was always a sense that like the idea is that our cities and surroundings have always been queer. It's not anything new, and it's not anything like like that the young people are getting. Queerness has always existed, will continue to exist, and this is like this kind a map. This map is a sort of testament to that, like that public spaces in cities have especially always been queer. And this map again is a documentation of politics. It's a documentation of like the spaces in the city where protests, like very important landmark protests happened, where queer people organized, where they collectivized. But it's also a map that shows like party spots and like hidden makeout spots, and like all of these sort of like hidden delightful secrets about the city of Mumbai are all included in the map. And I think what's really, really cool about this map also is that it is a living piece of art. It's not static. Like, for example, to this day, people will come and tell us, ki, like, oh, behind this mandir in Bandra where people take off their shoes, if you take someone's shoes, it's like an indication that you want to, like, you're cruising, basically. And like gay people go and like make out behind this particular temple in Bandra. So all of these like insights are still being added, and like like the I think it's very cool also because I feel like the format of the map and the way that we have like put it out immediately sort of like um you know immediately sort of like elicits a response from people who are looking at it also. It makes you think like, oh, what are the other spots in the city that I know where queer people go to cruise, queer people go to be with each other, to meet each other, and all of these things then get added to the map as well. And the approach to sort of recording the history of a city in this way is that it challenges conventional ideas of history also. It's almost like we're querying history itself, because there are lived stories, there is information, and these are all, it's not just politics, it's not just riots, it's it also foregrounds fun, it also foregrounds pleasure, it also foregrounds like makeout spots, cruising spots, party spots, and things like that. And while actually researching, while we were like putting together the map, we also spoke again to a lot of people who were around in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, who visited and frequented a lot of these spots. And they were able to sort of like give us like very, very beautiful insights. One of my favorite stories is about how at Flora Fountain there are a bunch of like booksellers, who sell pirated copies and magazines and things like that on the footpaths. And apparently these booksellers used to sell copies of Bombay Dost on the down low in secret. And so that's how a lot of people got their hands on this very a gay magazine in Mumbai. So all of these like information anecdotes are actually like very, very important, and we realize that if no one documents them, this sort of history and this sort of like very delightful story of the city almost is going to get lost. And so in a sense, the queer map is also like a love letter to the city. It's a love letter to queerness. It's a love letter to what makes. It's a love letter to the fact that queers can go out in public and own public spaces very unabashedly, very, very shamelessly, so to speak. And so, yeah, I think this is my favorite piece of work that I would like to leave us all with. And if anybody has any questions, any insights, anything that people would like to say. Yeah, and I think this is like one of the
Just
things.
sorry, I'll interrupt. Yeah, I just wanted to say like this queer map is like really amazing thing. I mean, still, I think till past like some time, like you still have to sort of Google, and then there will be some very weird websites that will come up that will show the hidden spots basically for the for the people to meet and everything. But this is something putting that information or like more information actually and right out there, like giving it a physical form. That's really great actually.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rishabh.
So I think we have come to the end of our. We rejigged a bit, Ishita, when we saw the 1.5 hours. So we've come to the end of what we wanted to say. If people wanted to have a discussion around how, like just an open discussion about how we want to think about archives after this, or if you would like to take over and just have an open discussion, or I can moderate it. If people, it's been some time and a lot of information, so people might be too tired also. It's really up to everyone. If you'd like to just we started off by saying, how do we think of the archive? And after having gone through this, the question comes back, how do we think of the archive?
Yeah, anybody can have
And that is why I think, sorry, I'm just saying that there's a conscious decision around not setting the context again, because somewhere it felt right that the masterclass puts or sets the context. So I like how we went in and out of the idea or redefining the idea of archive building. And at this point, I think I just want to reiterate what this invitation was about. Queer India Archives is over 2 years old, and it needs to have a website, a digital presence, or a presence of communication apart from the basic information that we're sharing on social media. And in trying to visualize how do we want to communicate, how do we want it to be a community engaged representation of a project, we have reached our own sort of hurdles or intersections. And in this process of exercising, we just felt that why not engage with teams or practitioners who have already been doing it. That's been the format of these dialogues so far. And this was the invitation to Agents of Ishq, that you have been doing it. Can you tell us what are the things we need to think about? What are the things we need to keep in mind when we continue drawing, designing, thinking about representation of a queer Indian archive, a queer South Asian archive? So, oh my God, you've given me a lot of food for thought. I have been constantly listing things, and I have questions, but I also want to leave it open first to the audience and see. And I'm also quite excited of how the chat is playing out. People, suggesting, saying things, clarifying. It's very, very, very inspiring.
I think
We
Unnati
can
has raised a
go to
hand.
Unnati. Yeah, we can go to Unnati.
So I loved like the entire presentation was so wonderful, and the graphics, the visuals, they're so beautiful, and they're so like they carry so much meaning. It's not just that they're aesthetically pretty, because like we're all running around behind aesthetics, but these aesthetics carry so much meaning and power. So like I just had to say that first. But yeah, so the queering the map of Bombay, that whole project, the queer map of Bombay, that it just seems so phenomenal. As somebody who's interested in the city, I'm based in Delhi, so I'm interested in Delhi's history and all of that. But yeah, somebody who's interested in studies of cities and how gendered experiences of cities, carry out. I was just wondering what kind of sources or resources you found helpful in getting this information, because obviously this won't be available online or like freely just out there. I'm thinking it'd be more like, talking to people and look and actually having conversations with people who've known the city for a long time. So I was just wondering, I mean, I don't know if anyone's doing this kind of work on like making a queer map of Delhi. If there is anybody, please let me know. I would love to be a part of that and contribute to that. But yeah, I'm just very interested in how one could go about doing it.
Thank you so much, Unnati. So yeah, I think for the queer map, we have mostly just gone and spoken to people, and I think that is like a large part of that was actually a large part of the research, and like large part of how we collected all of the information for the queer map also. Like we spoke to people who were around, and we spoke to people who were like there, like from the 80s, 90s, and like who were there and in and around these spaces. We asked them to share their anecdotes, and yeah, I think in that sense, it's also like a very anecdotal map of the city as well. And yeah, if you want to see like a queer map of Delhi, I think you should take up the initiative and go and create a queer map of Delhi.
Thanks for the motivation. I think I'll see.
I have a question, if that's okay. Oh, okay. I will raise my hand and wait my turn.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. So, what I essentially wanted to ask is that, and I work in the context of a museum, right? And the idea that archives are usually built for a purpose. I don't know what that purpose is, but it seems to be the agreement between all archivists that the archive exists for. It's not for public access. It's for some kind of specialized access, is what I understand, right? When I think of archives in general, um, and then when you are building queer archives, right? And so the work. While I think the work and again, maybe I'm just getting confused in terms, but I think a lot of the work that AOI does is archival in nature, but it's not in the creation of an archive. But whereas what I think Queer India Archive is trying to do is, because I also looked at the website and it's asking for narratives and stuff like that, seems to be creating a collection, right? And I just wanted to understand what you all feel about what is the purpose of an archive? What is a queer archive meant to achieve in our context?
Are you asking Ishita or are you asking us?
I think I'm asking everyone who can answer,
Okay.
who wants to answer.
So I'm going to jump in and begin answering, if that's okay with Ishita and Anshumaan.
Yeah.
I think in India, especially across disciplines, the archive has been seen as more linked to academic research, and also has been protected from public in general. So it's not easy to access archives. I think my sense is it comes from a certain colonial plus Brahminical idea of who gets to have access to knowledge. And I think there are a lot of moves for archives to not be to be more publicly accessible. But I think it's a very important question that one has to ask: is when you create an archive, who do you want who do you want to have access to it, and how easy do you want to make the access? Because it's also how do you make the archive then, right? Because there is a certain kind of resource keeping that you do for academic study, but if you want something to go to public discourse, that kind of depth and language of material becomes difficult for people to access. You need storytelling in a different kind of way. I want to quickly tell you something AOI did recently with the CSMVS Museum in South Bombay, because they have a team that is also, they have their objects, they have their archive, but they're also wanting public to get more interested and more curious about the objects that they have. So they actually invited us to do an arts. They invited us to do an arts project. A bunch of artists were invited to arts projects, and and AOI did it. They had the ancient sculptures up, and AOI did a project on gender, taking from the ancient nude sculptures, male sculptures, Greek sculptures, and doing a history of masculinity. So use the objects to tell a history, which it is storytelling of history, but it went into many archives to pull those stories out, and therefore you have the sources, right? And at the same time, what it does, it invites people to go to the museum and look at the things that are there in the museum. Otherwise, the museum has a certain kind of, like, there's a predisposition towards who goes to the museum as well. And what our work did was to break that predisposition, to actually encourage one to go into the museum and look at the sculptures, not just as students of history, but as speaking to culture in much larger ways that might be interesting for people across the board, right? So I really think it's a very important question you've asked, but I think in my little experience, I think there is across the world a sort of rethinking of what is the archive and who is it for. Ishita or Anshumaan, any of you?
Yeah, I think where you left it is where I'll pick it up. So definitely there was a limit to what the archive could do. But I want to say and I say it very confidently, that now there is a lot more consensus, or at least an effort, even if not an active reality, of archivists or archival setups or organizations or non-organizations to work on access or making archives accessible, and I can list them for us. And I'm talking about archives which are not necessarily mainstream. I'm talking about archives which are not necessarily politically comfortable, and even these are now accessible. But I also want to highlight a very important thing that I think as an archivist, one is realizing the back and forth or the push and pull. An archive is also supposed to safeguard histories or evidences. And I don't think the limitation to access only comes from a place of power. It also sometimes comes from a place of care. And this is somebody very radical who made us realize, because we work with a lot of micro archives, we work with a lot of difficult, non-conventional archives or archival projects. There is also a need to think about its safety before one just says, let's put it out there in public. And that's where I think the layering starts happening, that can you put out the evidence as it is, if you're not situated in a well-guarded building or in a well-guarded structure. Tomorrow everything will be erased, and that's the importance of archive, because it is the only copy, it's the only form of memory sometimes, and it's a lot of risk to take if somebody was to come and erase it. And it's very resource intensive to say, let's have reproductions, let's have copies, let's have more setups or centers or organizations or people who can safeguard it, even digitally. We're facing it already. It's been 12 years of working in this field to understand that digital backups or digital reproductions are also as perhaps more resource heavy. Having said that, where is Queer India Archives going is really both in terms of safeguarding these lived histories, memories, tracing them because they don't exist. So we're tracing them, we're recreating them first as evidence, then we'll hopefully work on the visual representation and storytelling, and definitely wanting to make them accessible, available. The purpose is very simple, perhaps, is to basically strengthen the activism, strengthen the representation, strengthen the story of queer lives in the country. And that's where I think I agree with AOI, past, present, future really starts sort of merging into one from where we are also seeing it. I hope all that made sense.
Can I also add like
Yeah,
one more
thank
quickly?
you.
I think also, and I'm going to speak just as like, what I think AOI, like, I've worked at AOI for 3 years. And to me, I think Agents of Ishq is much more like, it's not just like an academic resource, but it's also like an emotional resource, right? And I think that's also important when I think that's a very sort of unsaid thing that I feel has, like, when you look at stories from history, or like when you look at stories of other people who are like you, I feel like it kind of is almost comforting in a sense, and which is why also like documenting historical stories but also lived experiences and people talking about their experiences on their own terms without judgment is also important, because a lot of times there's also people who queer people who also come to AOI's vast collection of like stories and say ki, oh, reading this particular story made me like it was almost like an exhalation, like I was all like I let out like a breath that I had been holding. So I feel like the emotional value of like a collection like this is also, I think, cannot be overlooked, especially for like younger queer people, or like, queer people who might not be able to find that sense of community immediately physically around them. So yeah, I think that was just like my 2 cents also.
And if I can segue, sorry, Nupur, did you have a follow-up question?
It was not exactly a follow-up. I had a separate question. Not a question,
Okay.
more like comment, but it's fine. You
No,
can
please go ahead.
go
Yeah.
ahead. Oh, okay. No, just this has been a really wonderful discussion and presentation. So thank you. I'm actually an artist and also a designer, but I work a lot with archives and institutional archives, and I'm trying to and right now I'm actually in Pune doing research at the National Film Archives on film censorship, particularly around gender and sexuality. So this all is really fascinating, and I've also been considering like how do we queer an archive like that, because there are gaps which are censorship, and then those things were taken out, but then in things that were taken out there are gaps, so it's like it's a constant sort of a thing, and all under the premise that desire and sexuality are something that I think the nation state just cannot handle, and it's always been this thing that can always overflow and run and cannot be
Yeah, it's
caught.
too abundance. That's the word.
It's the abundance, which I really love that you talked about that, because it totally connected to these things that I've been thinking about, and also just back to the archive, and how just the anxiety. There's anxiety with these archives that people don't want you to take the whole file; they only want you to take bits of it, and yet at the same time there are these original documents that are decaying literally in the humidity, and they're just lying there. They're like, anyway, that's a separate thing, but I think there's building an archive, there's sort of like, how do you make it accessible, and multiple ways obviously of thinking about accessibility. How do you activate archives then to create stories and tell stories, and have people and publics sort of interact with them. That's why it's like a multifold sort of consideration, really. And in any case, I really loved the focus today, and just like on when I'm thinking about querying the archives, and I'm looking at all of these scenes that were censored, and the lack of queerness, let's say, in some sense, the gender anxiety, and just like how to then create encounters with actual queer stories, going back to the point of that these are not new stories, these have existed from the beginning of time, and so I think it just gave me a lot to think about, and I've been sort of searching for these stories that are much more just lived stories that are from different time periods to coincide and encounter these sort of hegemonic, even though they are the absences, the hegemonic absences. So that's where I'll leave it, and yeah.
I just wanted to pick up. Sorry, that's my dog barking. But I just wanted to pick up on Gurpreet. Gurpreet, I don't know if Anshuman answered your question by talking about emotionality. But I think in AOI's world, when we are talking about beauty, aesthetics, feelings, etc., we are also keeping very much in mind that we are creating a space for people to be talking to people. And you're doing it through the narratives. And when people talk to people, information is too cold if it's information alone. People need to see people. People need to understand that other people lived like this. And there is something that happens in that state of being. And I would answer that from AOI's point of view, but I'm going to I'll come back in 1 second. Anshu, if you want to pick up from here, I'm just going to put this off also and get my dog to keep quiet.
Yeah.
Just 1 second. I have a doorbell going. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gurpreet, to also like build on what Sameera was saying, and also what I had said earlier about like, the emotional impact that a collection of stories can have perhaps for an individual. I think one of, as like I am like a visual artist, and so I can answer from that space. And I feel like personally as a visual artist, I want like, especially if it's like a collection of stories that people are going to be interacting with, like it needs to feel also welcoming. And Agents of Ishq is, yes, we do talk a lot about queerness, but we're also primarily a sex education project, right? And the overall approach to all of the work that we do at Agents of Ishq traditionally has been this, because like there is so much stigma and there is so much like anxiety and worry of people sort of like, there is so much like anxiety that people have when talking about sex. I think if you do it with humor and if you do it with emotion and you do it with a lot of warmth and beauty, it kind of eases that anxiety a little bit, and it kind like it just like makes the entire space like a much more approachable and like a friendlier, I guess, like friendly is the word that I'm looking for actually. Yeah, like it seems not as intimidating. It suddenly seems not as intimidating to be like and you suddenly feel that you can also like regardless of how sexually experienced you are, or like regardless of how much knowledge about queerness you have, that you feel that you are also able to have a stake in the conversation and like enter the conversation on your own terms without judgment also. So I think that is also like one of the reasons why we do pay so much importance to like beauty, aesthetics, affect, and things like that in like the work that we do at Agents of Ishq as well. Yeah, I hope that answers your question also.
So I guess we have Chroma's question, and then Rishabh. Chroma's question is, how do you plan to make India's queer history more accessible to curious teen minds? Because textbooks are being erased.
Yeah.
I mean, we are digital. Yeah, we have stuff up. We have a website and we have social media. Social media is getting more and more difficult. That's just the reality with the algorithms. But we do have a website. We are now moving into trying to consolidate, because we have 10 years of work. So we have a lot of content and we are looking to consolidate it into, into like stuff on menstrual health, stuff on abortion, etc., etc. How we can access teens? I don't know. Schools won't necessarily allow us to, so that's something we'll probably have to get into conversation with. But right now we are still in the sort of consolidating our material to see what we have in each area. We haven't gone on to a specific. That's an Agent of Ishq answer, Ishita.
Yeah, Agents of Ishq also does a lot of workshops, and that has also been a way in which we have sort of like interacted with and reached out to a lot of young people, adolescents, teenagers also in the past. Like we do workshops on our own independently. Also, we also do workshops like by partnering with other organizations that work with young women, again from like rural parts of India, small towns. We've also like collaborated with. We've also partnered with several schools, universities to like help them like structure the curriculum and also do workshops with their teachers and their students as well. So yeah, like we do also like outside of social media, there is also like us sort of taking the work on the ground and showing it to teenagers, adolescents, teachers, educators, parents, whoever happens to come to our workshops. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that building an archive has meant usually not just keeping it digital or keeping it information oriented, but engaging with it in terms of workshops so far, because we are a very young archive. And we have been able to meet teens right out of school in their universities or in their college. I think Shobna would be in a better place to speak about her even visiting schools when she's been asked to or invited to. I think we are also working quite closely, or at least intend to, with educators. And I think that's another route, or other educators are interested in understanding the whole idea of this archive building process and what are we finding in it. And one would want to hope that the circle will complete itself and they will take it back into the classroom, and it's not dependent on the written books. So that's one of the protests of the archive itself, that you're not interested in what's printed and what's published only. It is the lived voices or the experiences. And for that matter of fact, a lot of team is already very engaged on social media with us, which we are quite happy and amazed about, because these are stories from past. So this perception that the youth is not interested in the past gets sort of auto-corrected quite often with many such archiving projects.
Mm-hmm.
We'll take the 2 questions and then we should close. I'm just speaking for digital fatigue, and perhaps then we can continue the conversation online. Is that okay? So Rishabh and Mithul, yeah. Rishabh, you can go first.
Okay, yeah. Anshumaan and Sameera, please do pardon me for this question. So this question comes because Sameera just said that like this archival building, and it is actually because it's something which you can have it in hand, like a physical thing. And it's also then it becomes like an information sort of you're getting, and sort of you takeaways from it. So because health has been a major factor of a concern, a stigma around the queer community, do you plan, the AI plans to sort of build something around it? Hello?
Are you asking if
Yeah,
we are building health resources?
It's a question. I know it's a very,
Okay.
yeah.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work in, Anshumaan, I'm jumping in with this, if that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
We do a lot of work in collaboration with people. So we have built resources on health. We've built resources on law. We've built multiple resources. What people do is people who are experts in that area often reach out to us because they're looking for accessible, friendly communication so that the information can get out to people. So one of the recent projects, I'll give you an example, which was very exciting for us. We collaborated with an organization called IBIS Healthcare on self-managed abortion, which apparently in India, the research shows that most people are using self-managed abortion. So then the question becomes, how does one use it safely? So IBIS approached us, gave us a research data. We worked with them to create a narrative. We put multiple narratives online born from their data. Those narratives were narratives which said, hey, abortion is not neither, it doesn't have to be isolating, doesn't have to be taboo. In fact, the data shows that people get help, that there is support. And we also put information, we also created infographics. We did that online, and then we turned the infographics into an on-ground toolkit that is being used in Tamil Nadu and translated in Tamil. Which is being used in Tamil Nadu by healthcare workers on ground. This was done through an IBIS grassroots organization collaboration. So the work is going all the way down there. So it's not just being put out into the universe, it's actually going to targeted spaces as well, but it happens in collaboration and partnerships. We are also working with an organization called Sehat, which has a gender integrated modules. And we're right now in the process of working with them to help them ground and anchor the gender understanding. They have created a gender integrated module across medical education in Maharashtra. So they approached us to help them create content that could be used in the teaching modules, both to make students more interested in it, but also to help teachers who may or may not be so well versed in the area of gender. So we do this work in multiple ways, but usually in collaboration with experts. We don't see ourselves, we are expert storytellers. We don't see ourselves as experts in these particular fields.
Yeah.
You have anything to add, Anshu? Or?
Yeah, and I think also sorry, am I audible? I just realized that I had put my mic down.
Yeah.
So also, as I mentioned earlier, like a large part of the work that Agents of Ishq does is also around sex education. And like we do talk about like health and things like that also in the work that we do. Like, for example, we've also put out these like helpful little like informational like material about how to use a condom correctly, or what kind of doctors you can approach for what kind of STI testing, what kind of lubricant.
Work on menstrual health. A lot of work on menstrual health also.
Of course. Yes, we talk about like menstrual health as well. We also talk about like mental health, like mental emotional health. In fact, I think like sexual emotional, like the axis between the emotional and the sexual health wise, like well-being wise, is also something that we work on quite a bit, quite a lot. And so yeah, like on our website also, like we have a bunch of resources that talk about like access, that talk about like healthcare, and just like basic sex education material around that also. Yeah.
And I know this is not necessarily aimed at not necessarily aimed at for us to answer, but it's quite fascinating that NAS Foundation Archives, as well as Sangini Foundation, Sangini India Trust Archives in Delhi, have already opened up a lot around histories, medical histories. And similarly, when we were looking at personal histories, whether it's Professor R. Raj Rao or Ashok Rao Kavi, what of course, again, health. And what is interesting is I just want to connect it to what Sameera said, that it just calls for ethics, new forms of ethics to understand health histories, how should it be put out. And this is why I'm sharing something completely different, which Curating for Culture has embarked on is to work with practitioners. So this was in collaboration with the St. John's Hospital Museum in Bangalore. So you have the right kind of experts or expertise who can help understand health histories, its vulnerability, its sensitivity, how should it be archived, and perhaps the archiving and the storytelling might need to be different than the way we do archiving of queer or gender studies. So just wanted to add those thoughts here in terms of same looking projects or sub collections might still need newer thoughts and frameworks and ethics before everybody can embark onto them and put them out there. Yeah. Over to Mithun.
Hi, Anshumaan Sameera. First of all, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, now better. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for laying out all of your work here. I only had access to the website and Instagram, but this adds so much to me understanding what Agents of Ishq does. And one of the things I love about it is the accessibility that we always keep in mind in everything that we put out. And I don't mean translation into a different language. We were, in fact, discussing on the title of this poster with a friend yesterday and how an understanding of why Satrangi was an important term to be used in this masterclass. Right? That was one. The second was discussion of archives and the meaning of it. I'm an artist and I work with archives, but I've also worked in formal capacities in tribal institutions. And for me, one thought that has always guided working in archives is it's a creation of parallel histories and the narratives. And then under that umbrella, can archive not have multiple meanings? For example, an archive that you just mentioned as against queer archives or what Agents of Ishq is doing are very different archives. And to add to what Anshumaan was saying, the way I look at Agents of Ishq is an archive for meaning making. Meaning making of different folks over the period of decades, including today, but looking back and understanding, like today we're talking about the 1920s Catholic book, but I want to imagine what Agents of Ishq will mean someone 20 years from now. Yeah. So there's no question here. It's just some thoughts that I understand archives by and just want to go out and see what.
Cool. On the inclusion of the word Satrangi, if everybody can quickly pay attention to the title also, the S is in brackets. So it was meant to be like a play between Satrangi and Atrangi. And yeah, and so like that's also one of the like sort of like inside jokes we have in the AY team also, that like, yes, there is Satrangi, but a large part of queerness is also being Atrangi. Like it also like lies in the rebellion, the rambunctiousness, the like, shameless is like it has, as a word, has like negative connotations, but I feel like shamelessness is such a big part of being queer. And I think all of that we wanted to sort of bring out in the like that's the kind of like feeling we wanted to generate in this masterclass also, which is why we have Satrangi with the S in the bracket as well. So yeah, and Sameera, you can. talk about that.
No. It's we've used that somewhere. I think in one of our posts, but it was Anshuman's idea to correctly give that title. Yeah.
And it worked with the invitation quite rightly. I think it's an answer rather than a title for us, because when I saw it also, the first time they sent the information to us for the posters, I was like, oh, this is where the answer lies to all the visual aesthetic questions that we are asking. So yeah, and we got, as you rightly said, Nicole, we got to see the nuanced version of that answer of creating Satrangi worlds, more of them, and through different projects. It's a good question and a good answer to end with. Can we do that, or is there anyone who's got a real burning question? Yes, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I can't do justice in saying thank you. So, I mean, I'm glad that everybody in the comments has done that. But it was a power-packed masterclass in terms of information, in terms of feeling things, in terms of connecting with each other, in terms of being together as a community. Thank you. Yes, please let all the thank yous come along with all the thank yous that I'm trying to say. Thank you, Sameera. Thank you, Anshumaan. You definitely made the Wednesday very, very exciting, or rest of the week very exciting. I don't know about this.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. I think Anshumaan and I had a lot of fun thinking through this together. And Anshumaan will, I think, agree with me that it was actually great to talking to all of you and having such interest in the work we do. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I'm
also for
sure
coming
the
here.
video recording, once it goes up, sorry, Anshumaan, I'm just saying once the video recording goes up, you might find more communication coming your way, is my bet. Yeah. Sorry, Anshumaan.
No, I was also just like thanking everybody for joining us on like a Wednesday evening. And I know we disrupted your week, but we hope that it was like a very joyful and exciting disruption. And yeah, this has been wonderful for me as well. And it was lovely to hear everybody else's thoughts. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for being here till 8:06 p.m., which crosses 2 hours. Thank you. And yes, the video will be out. I'm sure you want to look back at it, or you want to share it with friends. We will keep you posted on the social media handles. And Anshumaan and Sameera, I'm sure we have a longer way to go in terms of collaboration. So yes, looking forward to that. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Good night.
You. Good night. Ishita?
Yes.
We'll
Yes,
get the
yes,
chat also. Now, people have written such beautiful things and have such beautiful
Yes,
questions.
the chat gets recorded automatically.
Okay, great.
I think I've also selected the transcript button, but if that's not happened, but definitely the chat gets recorded. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you then. All right,
It's
bye-bye.
okay if you also take screenshots of the Mentimeter activity, no?
Oh yeah, I've taken screenshots of everything, almost everything.
Okay. Lovely.
I'll share all of that by tomorrow.
Thank you. All right, bye.
Bye.